works. This is not a get rich quick scheme by any means, but in 5 to 10 years, you can drastically change the trajectory of your financial life forever. I mean, nobody should be in their job for more than a decade or two if they make more than 50, 80 grand a year.
Well, today we interview my friend Lane out of beautiful Hawaii. He owns over 5,000 properties. He runs a podcast. He's a huge investor. And we talk about all those things on the podcast today. And you might be going, well, it's not exactly marketing, a little bit of marketing twist in there, but mainly going, okay, business owners who are looking to market their business also are probably looking to diversify as well. So if you have some of the extra income, maybe you can buy some property or look at the options that are out there. That was one of the main reasons I wanted Lane on the podcast. He's a wealth of knowledge, and I know you guys are going to love this one. So stay tuned in just a few moments for the next episode of the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. I'm your host, 𝗟RH𝗲. I'm here with a new friend out of beautiful Hawaii, Mr. Lane, who is an investing property person extraordinaire, which we're going to dive into, but I'll let him introduce himself before we dive in completely. So Lane, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mitchell. Thanks for not calling me a guru. I hate that word.
I hate that word too. And actually, and I remember reading on your bio, I know you you had a special phrase you use. You like, is it calling people out that are in those worlds or not wanting to be associated with that word guru? There was something on your website I saw. What was
Yeah, I mean, any dude that like in real estate, right? Everybody wears a suit and they're like, everybody's teaching you to, and then eventually getting you to do a course or something for $20,000, $30,000, which leads into another course. And then, now that the whole pandemic, you can't have these like dog and pony shows, in-person events where you teach people how to increase their credit card limits and run to the back of the room to buy the product. They're all on, they scattered to the podcast land. So you got to be careful. But yeah, a little bit about me. Currently, I own 5,000 rental units, but it didn't always start that way. I started investing in 2009 as a passive investor as I was working my engineering job. And yeah, I kind of grew up on that linear path of go to school, get a good job, work at that job for 40, 50 years, investing in the 401k. And then I bought a house to live in, which I don't necessarily think is a great idea for a lot of people. And then because I was traveling around for work all the time, I just decided to rent it out and, got that taste of cash flow. And, luckily I did it in my early 20s. And that was where I realized like, yeah, this is it for me. This is my ticket out of the rat race.
Hmm. Man. And so you bought that I think it was in Seattle. Is that up in Seattle you bought your first property?
Yeah, that's where I was working. And then, that's where I bought the first one at because I didn't know any better. And then I realized that sophisticated investors, they don't buy in places like Seattle, California, Hawaii, New York, Boston. I mean, it's just they're more primary markets. And primary markets, you just have things are just too expensive. You don't get the rent to value ratios necessary to give a cash flow on the monthly basis. So that
Okay.
the rent to value ratio is super important. You find that out by taking the monthly rent divided by the purchase price. So, $1,000 a month rent for $100,000 house, that's 1%. That's kind of the threshold we want to be above so we cash flow on a monthly basis.
Okay. And I'm assuming you like the monthly rentals compared to doing a vacation rental. And if so, why is that?
Yeah, I mean, vacation rentals, they get a lot of, they're sexy, right? And we invest in boring things. And I think that's what people who are very wealthy and quietly whisper, they invest in very boring commodities. Short-term rentals, the reason I don't like it for the most part is it's discretionary income type of stuff. I mean, you see what happens in a pandemic or recessions. People don't stop going on vacations. Um, I invest in workforce housing, which is, the lower middle class, which is I mean, it's a commodity, and I'm investing in a commodity. The lower middle class is growing as the middle class is shrinking, and people need like good quality apartments between $700 to $1,200 a month rent.
Okay. And it's it's funny you mentioned that too. I do have a friend up in Alaska that has rental properties. I think he has maybe like 50, 60, and he's looking to get more. And he's always said that he doesn't ever, and tell me, I'd love to hear your take on this because you kind of semi answered it already, I think. He's like, I never want to be at the very bottom of the market, but I never want to be at the very top. I really want to be in that. He always said around that $1,000 to $1,500 range for at least Alaska's market, because he goes, if there's ever a bad time, people come on bad times, they got to live somewhere. And so he goes, they might downsize from that $2,000 a month place to a $1,200 a month place. And he goes, I don't really want the bottom of rent or whatever, because then you just never know what you're going to get. Are you kind of in agreement with that and have the same philosophy?
Yeah, same premise across the nation, right? Like the high end luxury, you don't get the rent to value ratios there to be able to justify your investment. And then on the low end, these are more like the D and F class um, locations and properties. Bad collections, just it looks good on paper, but it
Yep.
just just a bunch of headaches, and just at the end of the day, the bottom line, you don't seem to collect all your rents that you thought you were going to. So there is a sweet spot in the middle. Um, that's kind of what I think where people don't realize. And a lot of the places that we invest are in the more B class, C class areas. So mostly blue collar. They're not in the best areas. They're not in the best school districts, right? But you try and get out of the war zones at the least part. And I think that's where new investors, they may get a little afraid of this stuff. But hey, man, so, financial independence is not for everybody.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Do you suggest then single family, duplex, triplex, 18-plex, apartment buildings? What is your sweet spot that you think is the best bang for the buck?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where your net worth is, right? If you're starting off like how I was, I graduated college in 2007, bought my first rental in 2009. I didn't have any net worth. So all I could go after was single family homes. But
Yep.
as most accredited investors will agree, you want to get out of property ownership at some point and go into private placements and syndications. Certainly when you become more of an accredited investor or you make a higher salary, because when you go into one of these entities, you're a passive LP partner, little to no liability, you don't get any debt in your name, and you don't do any of the asset management, none of the headaches yourself. Um,
Mm.
but it's a journey, right? I mean, I got 11 rentals to start out. It took me from 2009 to 2015, and then as I became more of an accredited investor, I started to jump into larger syndications and private placements.
Okay. And for this world of rentals, I think a lot of people, they've heard about it before. They're, these business owners who are tuning in to the podcast are like, okay, I got this business and I'd like to, maybe look at, I've heard people owning property and it's a good way to make some monthly income, but man, I don't know how to get into it. I don't know if I have enough cash to get into it. So I think people have typically always heard, no, 20%, maybe 10%, 25% to get in as a down payment. What is that amount? And is there a way around that for a business owner who's liking trying to get some more passive income coming in? Is there a way around that to have less down payment to get started?
Yeah, I mean, typically you're gonna need 20% down payment. That's what the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac loans, government subsidized debt, is going to require. And maybe we should have started out here at the beginning. I mean, I passively invest, right? Like, I think that's what confuses a lot of people. They think of real estate investing as flipping houses and wholesaling. There's all this stuff out there for like broke guys, people who don't have money. And if you're a business entrepreneur, likely that business is going to be your ticket, your highest and best use to make money. We're all trading time for money. Most of my clients are high paid doctors, lawyers, engineers, professionals, and therefore they already have some money, but they're short on time, so they want to passively invest. And that's what I probably suggest for a busy entrepreneur too, especially when you're in the startup phase. Um, yeah, you can get into properties for no money down. I don't know how to do that. I mean, that's just it. It's kind of like unicorn. You know, you're going to burn up a lot of time and sweat equity doing that. And my argument is again, what is your highest and best use? So when you get into the rental property ownership from a passive perspective, you get away from all this noise. It's very simple. 20% down payment, buy one, and then you save up for the next. You save up for the next, but magically, the cash flow from each of these properties helps you save up for the next property quicker and quicker and quicker.
Okay. And for I guess this business owner, they're like, okay, I'm going to buy this property. Oh, and now I got to manage the toilet broke and I got to collect the rent. Do you suggest they handle that on their own? Do they outsource it to a property manager? How do you handle, 5,000 properties? What did you
Yeah,
do?
when I own single family homes, always get a property manager, right? Those are the guys who take care of all these headaches for you. Of course, when you're getting little single family homes and you're making management calls here or there, so answering phone calls and emails from your PM, and that's what I would suggest for, especially if you want to make it more passive. If a lot of times people get stuck, they don't get properties that actually cash flow. So they don't have the 10% of the revenue to pay some professional to do this for them. And if that's you, I mean, you need to learn about the rent to value ratio. You need to learn how to analyze properties. If people want to go and download my free analyzer so you don't get stuck, they can go to my website, simplepassivecashflow.com/analyzer, grab it there. But I mean, yeah, that's why you go into cash flowing properties, so you can pay for a lot of these services to free up your time for higher, best use activities.
Okay. And you mentioned before we started recording about the tax side of things for property. I'd love you to dive into that so people can kind of comprehend and understand the tax world and how it applies to properties and kind of how you manage that, I guess, yourself. Go ahead and share that one if you want.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no secret. Like real estate gives you really good tax advantages over any other asset classes. Stocks, mutual funds, they don't have the same tax benefits as real estate. And why is that? Well, with real estate, you can deduct the building improvement value over a certain period of time. When you have, rental properties, you can deduct 1/27 of the value of the building improvement over 27 years. So that doesn't mean that the property is, losing value. It's just the assets, like the wood, the concrete, all these building improvement on paper, the IRS has deemed it to lose value over the years. So, you can imagine maybe you make a few $1,000s of passive income from income minus expenses. Well, you can take a paper loss based on 1/27th of the building improvement. A lot of times this wipes out all your gains for the year. So you don't have to pay tax. That's how you're not paying taxes on it. But you take this a step further, right? Accredited investors go into syndication deals. And on these larger syndication deals, we can do what's called a cost segregation. Basically, get like a geek, an engineer to make this big report for us. So now that we're going to give that big report to another geek, the CPA, to be able to write off this property a lot more aggressively than 27 years. A lot of times we can take the whole build, 1/3 of the building value in the first year. It's huge, often 10, 20
Mm.
times the amount of depreciation in the first year. And this is where we kind of work with clients, a lot of doctors, lawyers, engineers, entrepreneurs, where they may make three, four, five, $600,000 a year, but they can employ a real estate professional status strategy on their taxes to use these passive losses that they got from these deals to lower that income. So, for example, if I can take a doctor making $700,000, lower him to $400,000, a difference of 300,000, I just effectively saved him 150 grand on taxes right there.
That's good. And this world we're living in right now, the market's crazy. Most places I haven't really found where it's not crazy. I'm sure it's somewhere out there. You have all these properties. Is there a point where you're like, man, it's really hot right now. I'm just going to sell these properties that we have, make a whole bunch, and then take that money and reinvest it in a certain area? Do you suggest selling properties, or once you get them, just keep them forever? Or what's kind of your in that world for you right now with everything being blown up in the market?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really pay too much attention to pricing because we're cash flow investors, right? We've got a little bit more stoic approach to this. When when we go into an asset, we're buying it for the income stream. So if the price goes up, awesome, right? That's icing on top of the cake. And what we'll do is we'll either do a refinance or we'll sell the asset and turn it into more assets, right? Because what we want is that return on equity to be high, right? So take an extreme example. You don't want to pay off your properties, right? That's stupid. That's dead equity. That's not making you ROI. That's not increasing your net worth. So after a certain point, when your property appreciates, you're paying down your mortgage, you want to take that that equity and kind of split it off into two, or get HELOC, or get a cash out refinance, take the money and buy more assets with it to keep your return on equity high. And this is probably one of the biggest mistakes unsophisticated investors make. The buy it. It's cool to buy and never sell, but flex your equity in there. Get that return on equity high. Keep it high.
And I have a friend, that friend I was mentioning in the beginning. He took I know he said he made a big mistake in the investing world because he had some properties, he sold a business, and all this lump sum of money. And at that point, he's like, I'll just pay off everything. And he paid it off. And he told me, he's like, it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I feel like in investing. He goes, because now I have all these just paid off properties. And so he goes, what I'm thinking about doing is literally refinancing all of them and having this huge lump sum of money and then reinvesting it into hundreds more properties or whatever to get. And I was like, oh man, because in my head at that point when he was telling me, because this is years ago and I was a teenager, I was like, wouldn't you want to be debt free? Like that makes so much sense in my head. But he's like, no, because I'm gonna use it to go buy more properties that make more money. So I do understand that it's making sense what you're talking about. But I know
Yeah,
that
and this is like where like a lot of conventional financial wisdom like kind of leads us astray, right? Like that that's exactly what the system wants you to do, is pay off your properties so that you're not growing your net worth. Like the debt is probably one of the biggest benefits to all this stuff. Like with all inflation that's happening, you want to lock up good long-term debt so you can pay it off in future dollars. I think a lot of people they get ego wrapped up in, I don't want to owe any people money, screw them, which is completely wrong from in terms of a math and sophisticated investor perspective. I mean, just missing the boat on it. Um, yeah, I mean I made the same mistake. Like in the beginning, I vividly remember taking like a $20,000 check and paying down my mortgage, and in my gut, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, you run the numbers. I could have bought another property and grown my net worth more with that than paying my money and getting like 2% return on investment with that.
and I've always told people that if you look at it, I don't have great data on this, but please tell me again if I'm wrong. But some of the richest people in the world are some of the most in debt people in the world. You see, like they have these huge, maybe skyscraper buildings or houses or whatever, but it doesn't mean they're like debt free. They probably have a ton of debt that they owe, but they've managed it correctly where this property's paying for itself. The business is making a lot of money that's paying for all the things. And do you see that as the case, or am I wrong on that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the wealthiest people prudently use debt, right? Other people's money. I wrote an article in Forbes on this that people can check out. I think it's at simplepassivecashflow.com/debt. But yeah, it's very counterintuitive, right? I mean, you want to go into good debt, but debt's a tool, right? Like, like a hammer. Hammer is good for hitting a nail, but if you can kill somebody with a hammer. So what's important is you go into debt, but you have the cash flow to be able to pay the debt service, and even in tough times, right? That's the paradigm shift to what we're talking about here.
Okay. And so somebody who's listening, they have this business owner's going, man, I have this house right now. The market's crazy. It's worth my house. I owe 200 on my house, but it's worth 500 right now. Should I refinance the house, take some of that money and invest it in property? Is that what you would tell them? Or would you tell them, no, sell your house because you shouldn't own a house like I saw on your website. You should, if you're good with your money, and you should do something else with it. What would you tell that person that's, if they're listening to that?
Well, it depends, right? Like if this person is like, I mean, they're just clueless in terms of investing, they probably should just keep their money in there. Or if they're horrible with their money, like most people in this world are really bad with their money. They spend more than they make, typically, right? Those people should go buy houses to live in because it's essentially a forced piggyback. But the people I work with are the people that are diligent savers. They're the max out their 401k weirdos. And like they listen to a lot of podcasts about financial independence. And for those people, don't buy a house to live in. Instead, invest and grow your money faster.
You mentioned in the beginning, don't buy in like or not interested in buying in like California, Hawaii, some of those. Are there hot spots that you're like, man, this is a really good state, a really good city, or thing that you've seen, a really safe place, I guess, to buy rental property, the monthly passive?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the places that we'll target are like more secondary and tertiary markets. So not the high end places that you we all think are the sexy places because there's just too much dumb money there is the problem. People just push up pricing. So you know, the ones that just off the top of my head, like Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Memphis, Little Rock, Jacksonville, um, places like that, right? They're not the sexy places to live in, but they have good numbers behind it. We primarily focus on red states. I mean, not to say anything politically, but they typically a little bit more economically driven and focused.
Huh.
And we want the landlord laws on our side when we're the landlord. Go figure.
Okay.
So these days, your Arizonas, your Texas is just on fire, your Alabamas, your Floridas, your Carolinas. I take those 5 states out of the other 45 any day.
And you're right. Florida is crazy right now. I've always heard Arizona being a hot place, which or it is a hot place, a hot market.
Yeah, and that's another thing, right? Like this, generally the population growth is going to the southern Sunbelt states too, for whatever odd reason. But the population numbers are like that's what you follow, right? This is not rocket science what we do.
Okay. And I will tell you what, every lot in my area here in South Florida, I feel like they're all bought. I mean, there's houses going in everywhere right now in our area. And I think they announced last year, 2 years ago, there's gonna be like 10,000 houses just in my area alone in the next like 4 years, to whatever it was. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like it's crazy. So yeah, Florida, which obviously it's over the news, it's blowing up market wise. And because you can, of course, there's so many people in my area from like Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts. And so these people are selling their houses cash or selling them and taking, come down here cash and buying a house with saving like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Cause of course a Connecticut home is worth more than typically where I'm at, Florida home. And then they have all this cash in the bank. I wonder what they're doing with it. I wonder if they're reinvesting it into something. I would hope they're doing something with it, or maybe they buy a boat. I don't know. But yeah, I know people they like their toys. So I know that's a big part of getting over that and going, which here's the thing, and I know that I've thought about this. I'd love to hear your take on it. So these people listening and they go, okay, I have this money, but I really want to enjoy this time now. I have my kids are young. I want to enjoy, do this and do that, go on vacations, and I'll invest later. Which of course that sounds horrible, but what would be your I guess what would you tell that person for going, no, I take that money instead and invest it in property and then live really good later when your kids are older. Like, I don't know how you like argue that point, which of course you can't argue with somebody
I,
who's
I stopped arguing. I'm like, well, go listen to my podcast and go decide for yourself. This stuff works. This is not a get rich quick scheme by any means, but in 5 to 10 years, you can drastically change the trajectory of your financial life forever. I mean, nobody should be in their job for more than a decade or two if they make more than 50, 80 grand a year and good
yeah,
savers. I mean, like, if everybody said what I'm saying, go buy a handful of rental properties and even pay them off for all I care, right? Even just do a really horrible strategy of paying them off. You're going to do really, really well, way better than any of your friends or family doing this stuff in an asset class that's much safer than the roller coaster of Wall Street. I mean, this is where I learned very early on when I had my second property back in 2010, 11. I mean, I was like, I kind of did the math, like how I'm making money, returns on my money. I was making like 20, 30% annual returns. And if people don't believe me, I have a video where I go to like the whiteboard numbers on this at simplepassivecashflow.com/returns. But I was like, well, why would I not want to do this and go into that roller coaster of my 401k garbage of 8 to 10%? Right. And then I started to realize this whole system is engineered to kind of keep us working and to steal all these like hidden fees, carried interest in the 401k, all this nonsense. So if you want to keep going down this path that we know how it's going to end, then cool, right? Financial independence is not for everybody. I mean, if everybody said went and bought a handful of rentals, be financially free in a decade or less, I mean, who would get our coffee? Who would build our bridges, right? Like, who would do stuff? You know, maybe the people who would love it, and we all probably chuckling out there because not many people would do that, do what they're doing. I mean, society would crumble, right? So
mm.
yeah, don't listen to what we're saying here. Like, keep carrying on, guys.
Well, if somebody's listening and they are interested in either talking to you, using your services, or just listening to your podcast to get started, of course, because that's obviously the free way to do that. I would love you to please plug your website again and your podcast if somebody's interested in learning more about this, Lane.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, just check out the podcast, Simple Passive Cash Flow, Passive Real Estate Investing. And if people want to download the free rental light course, you guys can text the word remote to 314-665-1767. And then, yeah, get that free course I have there. But yeah, I mean, all this stuff is free on my website. I mean, it's all out there. You just got to put in the work and learn it and get out of your comfort zone.
Good deal. And he's not a guru, people. He's not a guru. We don't use that word here. We use extraordinaire. Um, Guy who plays cards right, continues to play the cards right. I don't know how you want to say it, but not the
Yeah. I mean, everything's free out here, right? I mean, I run a high level mastermind, but that's more for your accredited investor folks. But for people that are under $1 million net worth, everything's out there on my website for free. I mean, for the most part. I mean,
Okay. Good
it's
deal.
it's just one of my big missions is like, the middle class are the hardest working people. They pay their more than their fair share of taxes. I mean, those are the people that are getting screwed. It's not the wealthy people that have all these skills and tactics that we're talking about. And it certainly ain't the poor people living off government assistance. It's the people in the middle, and that's the people who, like myself, went to college, and we are all kind of sold this lie of putting your money in this government-sponsored 401k, buy a house to live in. Right? To me, it's all bad financial advice.
Mm. So, those listening, before we close it up here, if you were to give one piece of advice to somebody listening, or if you were to rewind and tell yourself back when you were even just 16, 14, whatever it is, one piece of advice, somebody listening, what would that one piece you'd give them be?
Just find somebody that's in your similar situation, right? Like I was an engineer. I followed people who had money and who were investing passively. If I would have wasted my time flipping houses, wholesaling houses, I probably would have never been here. Probably would have burnt up and give up.
Okay. So surround yourself around people you want to be like, more like, I guess, that side.
Well, surround yourself with your pedigree. I guess if you guys are like in credit card debt, dude, don't come to my website. Don't listen to me. I'm not person to I'm not the person to need advice from. You guys got to clean up your house yourself, right? And stop spending more money than you make. Or maybe you need to make more money, right? Like I went to college. I had a professional salary. If you make under 50 grand a year, again, I'm not the person to listen to. I'm not the person to follow. You may need to go to college. I'm not a huge fan of college, but it does help you to get a good salary to make more money to be able to invest it. Or you got to get that business going, right? Something's got to go. You need money to make money.
For sure. Okay, good. Well, I understand it completely now. So, Lane, hey, thank you for taking the time. You're busy. You got 5,000 properties you're managing and running. So, I appreciate you taking about half an hour or so to hop on our call with me and talk to the listeners. And I wish you absolutely nothing but the best. And hope Hawaii continues to treat you well. And hopefully, we'll get together sometime. If I'm over there in Hawaii, we'll have some lunch and sit on the beach together. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Mitchell.
Thanks, man. Well, I hope you were able to learn something about property investing and the management side of that from Lane today. He's a wealth of knowledge, and I would encourage you to look at his website. It's simplepassivecashflow.com and listen to his podcast, learn about him and what he's doing. You can learn a lot, and I want you guys to be able to diversify as you grow your businesses and become more successful. We'll be here next week with another awesome guest as usual. So we'll see you next week on the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. We'll see you then.